Well, we are continuing with our sermon series on rescue, and we've been talking about this idea of sin. Really, that's what this whole series has been about. It's about sin and our need for a rescue from sin. And remember that the reason we're talking about this is because sin is what keeps people out of the promised land. It's what keeps them out of the garden. It's what keeps them out of the presence of God. And if we're going to be a joyful people that's full of worship, then we're going to have to understand this issue of sin and allow God to deal with it in our lives. And we've been talking about these different steps that Adam and Eve went through. That forms the kind of backbone of the whole series. And we've been talking about the idea of Satan raising a question in their mind and then Satan creating doubt in their mind. And we're going to talk today about this issue of eating the fruit. And the Bible tells us that Eve took the fruit and she ate some, and then she gave it to her husband, Adam, who was with her, and he ate some, and then the eyes of both of them were opened. And when we look at the idea of eating, eating is really kind of broken down into two different parts. There's the tasting, and then there's the consumption. And it's interesting because tasting is one of those strange things that actually serves a purpose that we don't often recognize. God actually gives us the ability to taste things as a means of protection. Your tongue is an interesting organ in your body, and it's something that's given to you to actually detect chemicals. You have a built-in chemical detector, and that's your tongue. And I remember watching there's a guy on YouTube who eats MREs, and some of them are old, and he'll open it up and he'll smell it to see if it's good, and then he'll taste a little bit, and sometimes as soon as he tastes it, he'll say, no, I'm not eating any more of that. And he actually ended up in a hospital one time, which is why he's, I think, a little more careful. But I have seen him on YouTube eat biscuits, hardtack, that came from the Civil War. So he's not being that careful, but he's trusting that his tongue can actually detect if there's something wrong with the food, which is why God gives you a tongue. And really what we're talking about, tasting, is analogous to temptation. When we are tempted with something, that's kind of what happens, right? We consider what it's going to do to us. We consider what the outcome is going to be. And so we're going to look at today in Scripture an interesting passage that really harkens back to the Genesis passage that forms the foundation for the whole series. It's found in Matthew chapter 4, and it's the temptation that Jesus faces when he's in the wilderness. So let's read Matthew chapter 4, starting in verse 1. We'll go through verse 11. It says, "Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, 'If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread.' But he answered, 'It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.' Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said, 'If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone.' Jesus said to him, 'Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test.' Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All these I will give you if you fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.' Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him." This temptation of Christ is interesting because from a narrative standpoint, it harkens back to the temptation of Adam and Eve in the garden. And the temptations, even though they look very different, are actually thematically very similar to what Adam and Eve face. And we're going to look at kind of how temptation works and how we as Christians, when we face temptation, are to deal with it so that we can avoid sin. And in order to do this, we're going to look at three different aspects of this. The first one is know your place, which doesn't sound very intriguing, but I think it is. The second one is, will it hold? And then finally, we'll look at painful lessons. And all of these things, I think, form a really interesting and powerful way of looking at temptation when you face it. So let's first look at knowing your place. Now again, when somebody says that to you, it's not something that usually gets a great response from us, right? Somebody goes, know your place. Stay in your lane. Have you guys heard that one? Yeah, it's usually not said with a lot of love and tenderness. But here we have to understand this. This is actually a very positive thing. Know your place. See, Satan, when Satan tempts Jesus, he does it in a very interesting way. It says, the tempter said to him in verse 3, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. First of all, remember that Satan's opening gambit with Adam and Eve was a question. Satan doesn't come out and say, hey, here's some fruit, you should eat it. That's not what he does. He starts with a question. If you are the Son of God. If you are the Son of God. Now, why would he ask that question? Well, if you look back in your Bible to Matthew chapter 3, what happens is Jesus is baptized and the Spirit descends on him, and there's an audible voice from God that says, behold, this is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. God has established by His Word the sonship of Jesus Christ, and Satan is calling that into question. Now, Satan is doing something incredibly sly and seductive by doing this. He's actually doing something that's called qualifying. He's qualifying. Now, here's what he's doing. He's asking Jesus to do something to prove himself to Satan. Satan says, if you, Jesus, are the Son of God, then you need to prove that to me by turning these stones into bread. Now, here's the problem, is qualifying is a very subtle way of establishing authority, and it's something that most of us don't catch on to. It's incredibly subtle. And the problem is most of us fall into it. And the reason most of us fall into it is because we don't know our place. We don't know our place. So what's happening here is Satan is saying, basically, you need to prove yourself to me. What does that make Satan? If Jesus accepts this framing, Satan is framing this interaction in a certain way. And if Jesus accepts that framing, then he's accepting that Satan has authority over him. Here's the thing. Why does Jesus need to prove himself to Satan? Who is Satan to demand this? Why doesn't Jesus just say, I don't care what you think? If God has said that I'm your son, what does it matter what you think? But here's the interesting thing. Satan does this because this is how temptation works, and this is how the world works. And what's really interesting about this is, I was thinking about this week, is that most of us as Christians fall into this. How many of us have had the world come to us, and when I mean the world, I mean the culture that we live in, come to us and say, I think you as a Christian, I think you're a terrible, evil person because you don't do this, this, and this. And we run up and say, no, you don't understand. No, you don't understand. You've got this all wrong. What the world's actually doing to you is it's saying to you, you convince me that your faith, that your religion, that your beliefs is okay with my value system. That's what the world's doing to Christianity right now, all the time. It's saying, you need to prove to me that I will find your faith acceptable, that I will find your value system acceptable. You need to prove to me that you agree with me. And the problem is a lot of times as Christians, what we do, no, you don't understand, don't misunderstand. No, you don't get it, you don't get it. Really, we're in agreement here. The problem is that generally speaking, that God is not in agreement with Satan. That's the problem. Generally speaking, God and Satan are not in agreement with a lot of things. And Jesus promises us that if the world hated Him, it's going to hate us. And yet we spend so much time trying to qualify ourselves to the world. No, you misunderstand. We never say, this is what God said, and it is the truth. And if you don't like it, that's not my problem, it's yours. That's not my problem, because God is the one whose allegiance is primary in my life. That if God is happy with this, if God has said it, then it doesn't matter what you think. You see, the problem is that Satan is coming along and saying, you need to prove yourself to me. And Jesus, his answer really is, no, I don't. My job is to prove myself to my Father. Because if I take a different turn, if I decide that I have to prove myself to you, then that means I'm under your authority. And Satan is not in authority over Jesus Christ. In fact, that's why Jesus responds the way he does. It's very interesting, the subtlety that Jesus has here. Jesus understands that his faith in the fact that God is his Father does not need the approval of Satan. In James chapter 4, verse 4, it says, you adulterous people. I want you to listen to this and really understand it. This is super important. James 4:4, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? It can't be any more clear. Friendship with the world is enmity with God. Now, if you have a problem with that statement, your problem is not with me, it's with James, and ultimately it's with God. Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. You can't get stronger language than that. You have to make a choice. Who do you want to be friends with? Whose approval do you really need in your life? Do you need the approval of the world, or do you need the approval of God? Whose approval do you really want? And that answers a very important question, which is, whose authority is primary in your life? Whose authority are you really seeking? Satan's command is an interesting one. Turn these stones to bread. And he does that after trying to establish his authority over Christ. Now, why would Satan want to establish his authority over Christ? Because your identity comes from your authority. I think it's important for us to understand this as Christians. Your identity comes from your authority. Here's the situation. Let's say this. Let's say that you're a deputy. All right? I remember when I was a kid watching Westerns, I always thought it would be great to be the sheriff and to have a deputy. Let's say you're a deputy. Okay? What gives you your identity as a deputy? You're the authority, right? Who's the one who gives the sheriff his identity? Isn't it the people that elected him? It comes from the people. They are his ultimate authority. You know what I'm saying? Like, it goes down the line like this, and really what happens is your identity actually comes from whoever has authority in your life. And that's, Jesus understands this. In fact, that's why there's times when Jesus talks about that the religious leaders, they say, we have Moses as our father, or we have Abraham as our father. And Jesus says, no, Satan's your father. You're actually children of Satan because he's your ultimate authority. He's the one that you care about. And so your identity comes from who has authority in your life. And how can it be any different, right? Because the thing is that, whoever has authority, if you come over to my house, and maybe you were in my house and you were eating, you invited yourself in, and I say, no, we don't use those glasses to drink out of. We use these bowls. And you say, well, those bowls aren't for drinking out of. They're for eating cereal out of. And I say, no. You're wrong. I can prove you're wrong. At the end of your cereal, what do? You pick up the bowl and you drink the milk. We all know this to be true. Bowls are for drinking. It doesn't really matter what you say. If it's my house, if I'm the authority there, then I determine. That's what authority means. I determine the proper use for the things that are in the house, right? That's the way that it works. That's what authority means. Authority means that you determine the identity, right? So here's the thing. Let's say somebody owns a company, and they're saying, I'm going to establish this new company. I'm going to hire 100 people. And that person hires all these people, and he says, you're going to be a secretary, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be this, and it doesn't matter what you can show up and say, no, I'm actually the vice president. Is that the way it's going to work? No, the person in authority determines identity. If let's say that you are a blacksmith, and you're making tools for your job, you make that tool the way that you want to for the purpose that it is. You've given it identity from the very point of creation. You see, that's the way that it works. And so what we need to do is we need to know our place. We need to understand whose we are, and we need to understand what we are, and it's determined by the person that we give authority over. And if Jesus here gives authority to Satan, then he will be a son of Satan. But if he gives God authority, then he will be a son of God. And so Jesus does not do what Satan is baiting him into. He does not try to prove himself to Satan. In fact, he says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. He's saying something very important here. You see, Jesus is not just being tempted to give Satan authority, but he's being tempted to see the world the way Satan does, which is that the physical is the thing that's really important. Because that's the mindset of Satan, and that's the way that Satan views the world. That's the way our culture views the world. It's the physical that has ultimate primacy. It's the physical that's the most important. And Jesus is responding, that's not the way that it works, Satan. That's not the way that it works. I'm not going to prove myself to you, and I'm going to rebuke you for your wrong way of seeing the world. What brings life is the question here. Is it the physical or the spiritual? You see, all sin is meeting a need in the wrong way, a way that's harmful to others. How many of you guys have ever heard of, there's a Russian drug called crocodile. Have you guys ever heard of it? It's a terrible, terrible, terrible drug. And if you want to know, if you have a strong stomach and you want to know what this is like, just look it up. It's crocodile spelled with K's. So take crocodile, take the E off, put K's where the C's would be. That's what it, look it up. Look up the pictures, look up the videos of people who have been on it. Let me tell you what it's made out of. I'm not saying this so that you can go home and make it. Just to give you an idea of how terrible this stuff is. It's made out of codeine, iodine, gasoline, and red phosphorus. And the way they get the red phosphorus is they take matches and they cut the heads off, and then they soak it. So it's made out of match heads, gasoline, codeine, and iodine. They mix that up, and then they inject it into themselves or smoke it or do something like that. And what it does is it gives them a euphoric high. If you have problems in your life, it makes all those problems go away. If you're feeling down, it makes all of that go away. But what it does is that it's so toxic that your body is constantly trying to expel it out of its system. And so what happens is your skin starts breaking out in these terrible sores, because what's happening is your body is pushing that substance out through the skin, and pretty soon that skin dies, and then the flesh underneath it dies. And it's not unusual to find people with exposed bone all over their bodies. And I'm telling you, I know this is rough. If you want to know how rough it really is, look it up. It's so much worse than you can possibly imagine. So much worse. I won't get into it any other farther than that. But here's the thing. These people who take it, they have serious problems in their life. They have serious traumas. They have serious hurts in their lives. And so they take this to try to overcome that. The problem is that in doing that, they're destroying themselves and they're destroying others. You see, that's what sin is. Sin is trying to meet a physical need in a way that creates more problems. And that's why God has outlined for us a way to live. And that's why God has given us the commands that He's given us. Is He's saying, here's a way to meet your needs. He's made a world where our needs can be met. But in order to do that, we have to do it in a certain way that ensures that we don't destroy ourselves or destroy other peoples. Now, crocodile is a very terrible example of one way in which this goes awry. But you guys understand that there's spiritual ways of killing people, and we do it to each other all the time. We do it to each other all the time, don't we? How many of you guys remember being on the playground as a kid and having somebody make fun of you? Anyone? What was that kid doing? He was trying to meet his own needs by hurting you. He felt good, and he was hurting you. But this thing is, does that end at the playground? No. What happens is, as we grow older, we get smart enough not to do it to people's faces. Right? Isn't that what happens? We can still talk bad about people. We can still gossip about people. We just make sure that they don't hear it. But we're doing the same thing. We're destroying that person spiritually. We're starting, we talked about how in our meditation, how God sees us through the covenant. Well, we do the same thing, and what we're doing is we're destroying that person spiritually, and now when we see that person, we see them through the lens of what we've created. Don't we do that? Have you ever talked bad about a person, and then pretty soon everything they do starts to annoy you and irritate you? Why? Because you've created a lens that you're seeing this person through now, and you're destroying it. You're destroying the relationship. You're destroying the person. The thing is that what God has set up is something where all of us can not only have our needs met, but do it in such a way that brings joy and blessing and fruitfulness. But we have to follow God and say that the way to do this is primary over the physical meeting of the need. How you do it is even more important. It's better to go without than to do it poorly. The second thing we need to see from this passage is this question of will it hold? And what do I mean by will it hold? Well, if you look at the second temptation that is faced here, this temptation is an interesting one because it says the devil took him up to the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. It's written, he will command his angels concerning you, and their hands, they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." He's basically saying, look, put God to the test. Now, why would Satan be encouraging Jesus to put God to the test? He's basically saying, hey, does God, you say you're the Son of God, and you're saying, I'm going to listen to follow God, but is God really worth following? Does he really have your best interest at heart? Does God really care about you? You're caring about him, but does he really care about you? Is he really going to take care of you? Is he really going to protect you? Now, why would he be saying that? Because it's an echo of what happens in the garden. Remember what Satan says in the garden to Adam and Eve? God wants you to avoid this tree because he knows that if you eat it, you will become like him. God does not have your best interest at heart. And so having tried to qualify Jesus, he now tries to qualify God. Make God prove himself to you. Now here's the thing, we as human beings, we fall into this all the time. And it's a really effective temptation that Satan gives because he's not saying, hey, go out and sin. He's not saying that. He's saying and he's not even saying God won't protect you. He says, let's just make sure. Let's just double check. Let's just tie an extra knot here. We don't know if these knots will hold. Let's tie an extra one. Let's see if God's love for you will hold. Let's see if God's care for you will hold. Let's see if God's concern for you will hold. Let's just test it out and let's just see. Does God really care about you? Now here's the problem. The problem is that all of us face this temptation all the time, and the temptation really is, let's qualify God. And the reason that this is such a nasty little temptation is because it really destroys the idea of covenant. You see, there's this interesting way that the Bible looks at covenant. Covenant is when you have a covenant with somebody, you're for them and they're for you. You're for them. You think about them. You're considerate of them. You want to bless them. Your attention is to their good. Your desire is for their good. Your actions are for their good. And they're going to turn around and they're going to help you. They're going to look out for you. Now, here's the thing. That system is a dangerous system, is it not? How many of you have ever been in a covenant where you took that step and you cared about somebody else, but they didn't care about you? There's possibly no greater hurt than that. It's known as betrayal. And it's probably the worst sin that somebody can encounter is betrayal. And one of the reasons it's the worst sin that a person can encounter, and if you've encountered betrayal, I'm saying this so that you can understand and put into perspective what's happened to you from a theological standpoint. I'm sure that it hurt, and it might have been the worst thing that you've ever gone through. And from a theological perspective, it's basically the worst thing that can happen to you. Jesus experienced that when Judas betrayed him. Jesus was part of a covenant with his disciples, and he was looking out for them, and they were supposed to look out for him. And what happens is, when you get betrayed, you're looking out for somebody else, and nobody's looking out for you, and you're completely unguarded and undefended. And the reason that, from a theological standpoint, it's so destructive to have this happen to you is because it makes future covenants almost impossible. Because having been through that kind of betrayal, what most people say is, I'm never going to do that again. I am never going to open myself up like that again. I am never going to take that kind of risk again. I am never going to make that mistake again. And what happens is that the rest of your life then becomes, it's lacking the most glorious thing that can possibly be. Like, if a covenant is, if it's going well, if it's doing what it should do, it's the most glorious experience that a human being can experience. And if it's going poorly, if you've been betrayed, it's the worst experience that you can have happen to you. And so the temptation is really here, let's just make sure. But the problem is in the making sure you actually destroy the covenant. Because the way the Bible describes covenant, there's a word called hesed, and that's God's covenantal faithfulness. It's God's covenantal kindness. And what it means is that God is completely for you. But what happens is when you decide that I'm going to test this, then two things happen. One is you're qualifying God, so you're actually becoming the authority over Him. But number two, what's happening is you're actually breaking the covenant in doing this. Because when you're saying, I'm going to be sure, what you're saying is, I'm going to look out for me right now, and then the covenant's broken. Because remember, the covenant is you're looking out for God, and He's looking out for you. It's not hard to see why Satan does this. But the question is one, or the temptation is one, that leads to ruin. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 5, it says, likewise, you who are younger, be subject to the elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another, for God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. What that means is that when we let God be God, and we let Him be in charge, and we put full faith and confidence in that God is looking out for us. But if we start looking out for ourselves, we make ourselves an enemy of God, and then we become an enemy. Really what we say when we take Satan up on his offer, his temptation, is we say, you must prove yourself to me, God, by doing X. And we have become God by dictating the terms. And we've destroyed the covenant. And so Jesus doesn't give in to this. He replies showing that Satan is using Scripture wrong, and he says, no, this is not the way it works. He says, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Why? Because that is not the way a covenant works. And if we're going to be in a covenant, there's no safer thing than to be all in a covenant with God. Well, finally, let's look at some painful lessons. And we need to look at these painful lessons because this is really the crux of the issue. When we get to this last temptation that Jesus faces, this is where everything culminates. It says in verse 8, again, the devil took him to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and he said to him, all these I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, begone, Satan. So what's happening here is Satan's going up and saying, hey, I will give you all of this. And Jesus has a choice to make. Now, you'll hear theologians talk about, well, was this really Satan's to offer? there's a sense in which it was Satan's to offer. Because when we sinned as human beings, we actually made Satan our father. We gave him the power and authority over us. Now, it's true that everything in the world belongs to God, but it's also true that from our perspective, once we hand over the keys to Satan, then we are in a position of having to deal with him. But that's really not the point of this story. It's not really about whether this was Satan's to offer or not. It's the nature of the deal that Satan's trying to make with Jesus. He's trying to say, look, you can become king over everything by just worshiping me. Now here's the issue. The issue is, what does God offer? When God creates us and God says, I'm going to make you priest and king, what is God offering? God is offering that all of creation will be under the feet of mankind. And Satan is making the same offer. Satan's saying, look, everything that God would give you, I can give you. Just worship me. So then if we can get the same thing either way, then what's the difference in the offer? It's like this. It's like you go to car dealer A and he's got a certain car there, and then you go to car dealer B and he's got the very same car, the exact same car, same mileage, same specs, same year, same everything. So how are you going to make your decision? How are you going to make your decision? Price, right? Price. Who's going to give me the better deal? Well, this is where Satan thinks that he has the corner or the market cornered. Satan thinks he has the market cornered here because all Jesus has to do is worship Satan and he can have everything. Now, if Jesus is going to get all glory and dominion, if all that's going to be given to him, and he's going to go God's way, what does he have to do? The cross. See, that we have to understand the nature of the choice that's before Jesus. And the question is, are you going to get your kingship Satan's way, or are you going to get your kingship God's way? Now, it's important to understand that the nature of the kingship will look different based on which way you go. Why is it that Jesus has to, if he's going to be obedient to God, why is it that he has to go through the cross? Why is God requiring so much of him? Why? Here's the thing. How many of you have ever said, we were just having this discussion earlier today. So Josh was in the sound booth and he was working on something, and he had a tube of chapstick or something round, and he put it on the desk and it rolled, but it didn't just roll back in the sound booth. It rolled all the way off, and then it didn't just roll all the way off and land on the floor. It actually hit his foot so that it rolled back underneath the desk in the sound booth as far as it could possibly go. How many of you guys have ever experienced something like that? And how many of you see that your entire life is an unending experience of those kinds of things? Like, it's not just that things go wrong for you. They go wrong in such a spectacular way, and in a way that makes them as wrong as they could possibly be. Those are great times, aren't they? And you ask yourself, well, why does the world work like that? Come on, God. Like, there's a few things we could change around here to make things a little bit better. And the question becomes, why? Why does God have it work like this? And the reason is the nature of what it means to be in a covenant. You see, here's the thing. Let's say you can do everything for yourself. Let's say you're completely strong and independent. Whether you're a woman or a man, it doesn't matter. You're strong and independent, whoever you are, and you can do everything for yourself. You can feed yourself, you can clothe yourself, you can take care of yourself, you can iron your ironing, you can put your laundry in the machine and turn it on. You've got that down. You can load the dishwasher, you can let it run for 7 hours. That's how long it takes now. You can take the dishes out. You can do all this for yourself. You need no one. So, are most of us happy that way? The thing is that why do we look for relationships? How many of you have friends that offer you nothing? All my friends are like that, right? Now, here's the thing. I mean, how many of you really need, you need a friend? Most of us don't, do we? Mark, I appreciate the honesty back there. Most of us don't. So why do we want them? How many of you ever experience life and you go to yourself and you say, man, people are just, you get back, you go out, it's Christmas time, you go to the mall, you have to get that present, you don't know what to get, everything looks stupid, and there's lines everywhere and cash registers and people being weird and dumb, and you get back home, you haven't accomplished anything, and you say, a pox on all of them. How many of you have ever been there? Anyone? Just me? Just the pastor? Wow, that's not good. So here's the thing, why, if we don't need each other, then why do we want each other? And we know the answer to this question. We know it. And it's why covenants, it's why God lives in covenant. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit have been in covenant for all eternity and will be in covenant for all eternity because the thing is, somebody doing something for you is more glorious than you doing it for yourself. You go to a restaurant, it's always better than when you cook it yourself. Somebody makes it for you, it always tastes better. And I'm not saying just be lazy and expect people to serve you. The thing is, it's better for them when you do it for them, and it's better for you when they do it for you. Why? Because there's glory involved. They're saying something about, there's a valuing that's taking place. They're saying, through the sacrifice that I'm making for you, I'm valuing you, and that's not there when you do it for yourself. It isn't. And that's why we have friends. And that's why we get together in communities. And that's why it's so important to exist in covenant, is because it's better that way. It doesn't matter whether you can do it for yourself. It's no fun to do it for yourself. The problem is because we're human beings that have given ourselves over to the temptations of Satan, is we mess it all up so much that sometimes people finally say, hey, it's just better if I do this myself. But if we're doing it right, it's not better when we do it ourselves. But here's the thing. What Satan is offering to Jesus, it's so important for us to understand this, what Satan is offering to Jesus is, Jesus, be a king without sacrifice. Because that's what I did. Be a king, be the most important, be the highest, be the best, but don't sacrifice. Now here's the thing. He's saying be a king without covenant, be a king without any kind of sacrifice, but it doesn't work that way. If we want to be in covenant, if we want people to make a sacrifice to show us our value, then that means we have to make a sacrifice to show them their value. Let's say you could get a situation where everybody around you was constantly making sacrifices to you, and you made sacrifices to nobody. That's what Satan really wants. Look at me, I'm the king. That's the kind of kingship the world wants. The kind of kingship the world wants is when I go to war, you all go out and die for me. That's what the world wants. And it makes me feel so big and so powerful and so important. But that's not the kind of king that God is, and that's not the kind of covenants that God engages in. God engages in covenants where He sacrifices and glorifies you because He loves you and because it makes Him joyful to do it. And then you sacrifice for Him and He's glorified by that. That's the way that it works. But in order to have that kind of covenant, what it means is it's going to require sacrifice. There's going to be times when you have to hurt. There's going to be times when it's going to be painful. There's going to be times when in the covenant you have to say, I'm going to be all in for you, no matter what that costs me. You see, that's the kind of covenant that Jesus offers to us. Jesus offers the fact that He was willing to die on a cross for us. That there really is no question about whether or not God's all in. God has settled that question on the cross. God is all in for us. Jesus has settled that forever. But He's done even more than that. He's shown us the way forward of what it actually means to be in covenant and to live in a satisfying and real and glorious covenant. And that means that you have to take up your cross daily and follow Him. In Luke 9:23, that's what He says. He said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. And we know that that's the only way forward. We know that. All of our institutions in the world right now are losing their credibility. Every one of them. And the reason they're losing their credibility is because they're not willing to make any sacrifices for the people who are in them. All they do is require sacrifices of you, but they don't sacrifice themselves. And what happens is eventually you say, well, enough of this, I'm done with being betrayed. And so if we live in a culture, if we live in a community, if we live in a time and in a system where everybody, it's like a Mexican standoff, everybody says, I've been done because I've been betrayed. And so I'm not going to move until you move. And we all stand around each other looking at each other. I'm not going to move until you move. I'm not going to sacrifice until you sacrifice. I'm not going to put myself out there until you do. I'm not going to do anything until I'm sure that it's going to work. I'm not, and it's fair enough, you've been hurt. But if that happens, then we all go to hell. We all live in hell. C.S. Lewis had an image of hell where everybody moves farther and farther and farther and farther away from each other because they can't trust each other and they don't like each other. Well, the answer to that is the cross. And so the ultimate temptation that Jesus faces is to try to take the crown without a cross. And He gives it up. And that's what we're being called to. Now, it's important to understand that there's some things that we can work on this week to apply what we've learned. We have to believe in God's glory. We have to believe in the glory of God, that He has totally committed Himself to us in the covenant of Christ Jesus. And so the thing that we have to ask ourselves in light of that is, in what parts of our life are we trying to have the kingship of Satan versus the kingship of God? God is truly glorious. Christ has shown us who He is, and all glory and power has been given to Him. In what way are we following Satan, and in what way are we following God? In what way are we refusing to make the sacrifices that are necessary to truly live in covenant? Secondly, we need to belong to Christ through covenant. We have to see Christ and ourselves as completely connected. In what ways do you think that He doesn't have your back? Are there things that in your life that you just don't trust Him in? Are you saying to yourself, well, I know that God is being good to me, but not in these areas? Are there areas of your life that you think God is holding out some kind of goodness for you? Are there areas of your life where you think, no, this is one area where He's not being fair to me, He's not being just to me, He's not being loving toward me? And you need to really look at those areas and try to put those back in the hands of God. And lastly, become glorious by being transformed to His goal of glory. God is shaping us into something that resembles Him. And there are riches, unbelievable riches, to be found in allowing that to transpire in our lives. But it means embracing the cross. And in what areas of your life are you just saying it's not worth it? I think that as we grow and we mature, we start seeing how to make our lives glorious by cooperating with the Spirit. And it's good that we do that because God has intended for us a glory that is unbelievable.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out all of our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian Church, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Have a great week, everyone.